man rose in one smooth motion. He stooped, gathered the wood, and returned it without a word. His hands were broad and scarred, but his movements gentle. The child stared at him, then whispered, "Thank you," before running off. Lily found herself stepping closer, drawn as if by a thread. From a few paces away, she could finally see his face properly. His features were too symmetrical for a common beggar. A straight nose, strong jaw, a streak of silver at his temple that looked like a brush of moonlight. And his eyes. She had never seen eyes like that. Not just dark, but flecked with gold and green, like sun through forest leaves. They held a weight that made her stomach tighten. Not pleading, not defiant, but ancient and sure. He turned his head slightly, and their gazes locked. For a heartbeat, the noise of the square dropped away. She felt as though those eyes were reading the words she had scribbled on her secret map, the compass hidden under her gown, the thought she whispered to the moon at night. Freedom. Then he blinked once, slowly, and looked past her, as if she were just another passerby. The spell broke. The stewards barked her name, and she spun back to the line of veiled girls. But as she lowered her head and walked in step with the others, she felt the imprint of that gaze like a touch on her skin. Whoever he wasn't only what he appeared to be. Snow began to fall just after dusk, drifting down on the city like soft ash. Inside the Blackthorn Manor, candlelight flickered against velvet drapes, and servants scurried to lay out the sapphire veil and silver shoes Lily was to wear at the claiming ceremony. The house buzzed with anticipation, but in her chamber Lily felt only a cold, hard stillness. She stood before the mirror in her shift, holding the veil up to her face. The fabric was thin enough to see through, but heavy enough to hide her. She imagined herself tomorrow, standing in a line of veiled girls while men circled like hawks. Her stomach clenched. She set the veil down and reached for the compass hanging from its string. The metal was cold against her palm. Crossing the room, she knelt by the window seat where she had hidden her map. Unrolling it once more, she traced the road out of Asterhold with her fingertip, past the mountains to the sketched-in river and the sea. "One day," she whispered. "But maybe tomorrow is the day I start." Down in the courtyard, the city bells tolled a slow warning. Somewhere beyond the walls, wolves howled, faint but unmistakable. The sound sent a shiver down her spine. She closed her eyes and breathed in the scent of snow. "I won't be claimed," she murmured into the darkness. "Not by Cavan. Not by any man. Not by this tradition." Her hands trembled as she pressed the compass to her lips. It wasn't a prayer. It was a promise. Outside, the snow fell thicker, muting the city's noise. A shadow moved across the street below, a tall figure with 2 dogs, glancing up at her window just as she looked out. The beggar's face was hidden beneath his hood, but for an instant she thought she saw a glint of those strange forest-colored eyes. Then he was gone, and only the empty street remained. Lily tightened her grip on the compass. "Tomorrow," she whispered. "I choose for myself." The next morning dawned like a blade of ice. Trumpets blared from the palace towers, echoing through every street. 100 banners snapped in the wind, each one bearing the clawed sigil of the ruling house. Snow had been swept from the marble steps and replaced with carpets of crimson. Incense drifted from braziers, masking the smell of cold stone. Carriages lined the Grand Avenue, spilling out nobles in jeweled cloaks and warriors in black wolfskin. Their laughter and whispers carried like the hiss of snakes. They were not here for worship. They were here to watch, to choose, to claim. Lily and the other girls were led through a side gate into the Hall of Choosing. Light poured from stained glass windows, painting the floor in blood and gold. A dais at the far end stood empty except for the ceremonial throne. Above it hung the banner of the Alpha King, though the king himself was rumored never to attend. Stewards positioned the maidens in a curved line. Each girl wore a veil the color of winter sky, hands clasped to hide their shaking. Lily's sapphire veil felt like a shroud. Her heart thudded with every trumpet note. She scanned the sea of faces beyond the line of guards. Nobles lounged on cushions, whispering names and family fortunes. Warriors in dark leather prowled the edges, their eyes gleaming under torchlight. The claiming ceremony was spoken of as sacred, but up close it looked like a marketplace. At the very back, in the shadow of a marble pillar, she glimpsed a ragged figure with 2 dogs. He wasn't seated, wasn't even pretending to beg. He stood straight, watching quietly, as if the hall belonged to him rather than the lords. A steward struck a staff on the stone. "By right of ancient blood," he intoned, "the claiming begins." Trumpets blared again. The first girl was led forward to bow. Lily's stomach turned. She tightened her grip on the hidden compass under her gown and whispered under her breath, "Not me. Not today." One by one, the maidens were led forward, names announced in a ringing voice. Hands were inspected, faces glimpsed beneath veils, and contracts whispered like curses. Each time a noble or warrior touched a girl's wrist, the crowd gave a murmur of approval or disappointment. Lily's pulse climbed higher with every step. Then the steward's staff cracked against the stone. "Lillian Blackthorne," he called. A low ripple moved through the hall. Several men shifted in their seats. But one figure rose, tall, broad, armored in dark wolfskin lined with silver. His hair was braided back from a face carved in harsh lines. His hands were scarred from years of war. Everyone in the hall knew him. General Cavan, the Alpha King's fiercest warlord, a man who had taken cities and broken clans. His reputation for cruelty was legend. He strode toward her as though already victorious. The ring of his boots echoed off the vaulted ceiling. Lily's knees went cold. This was the future her family had hoped for, a match that would secure their place at court. This was the future she had sworn to escape. He stopped in front of her and reached out, fingers poised to lift her veil. Up close, she could smell iron and smoke clinging to him. His voice was a rasp of command. "Show me your eyes." Lily's heart slammed against her ribs. In her periphery, she caught movement. At the back of the hall, the ragged man was still watching, still as a wolf before a leap. For an instant, their eyes met again, forest green and flecked with gold, a silent question passing between them. She clenched her fists beneath the veil. This was the moment. If she let Cavan claim her, her freedom would be gone forever. Cavan's shadow fell over her like a thundercloud. The hall seemed to shrink until only his gloved hand and the cold marble beneath her slippers existed. The scent of iron and smoke filled her lungs, and her breath caught. She had spent nights imagining this moment and promising herself she would never let it happen. Yet here she was, veil trembling, trapped in the ritual. The steward's voice boomed somewhere above her head, reciting the ancient words of binding. Applause flickered at the edges of her hearing. Lily could hardly feel her fingers. They had gone numb inside her sleeves. Her mind raced with images of what came next. A lifetime of command barked in the dark, of chains disguised as silks, of her map crumpled and burned. Her family's faces floated up in memory, her father's ambition, her mother's proud smile, and she felt a stab of betrayal. They wanted this, she thought. They gave me to him. Cavan's fingers twitched closer to her veil. "Kneel," he ordered softly. The word struck like a whip. Her knees nearly buckled, but she locked them, heart hammering. In the back of her throat rose a thin sound, half sob, half snarl. She was 20 breaths away from losing everything she had dreamed of. The river, the sea, the wild hills beyond the kingdom's walls. For one dizzy heartbeat, she almost swayed toward him, thinking, "It's over. I'm his." Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw a ragged figure shift, the man with the forest-flecked eyes, standing utterly calm among the nobles as if he had all the time in the world. The sight snapped something inside her. Her pulse stuttered, then roared like a drum. "No," she whispered under her breath. "Not like this." Cavan's hand was inches from her veil. The steward began the binding words, his staff thudding like a heartbeat against the marble. The hall's murmur rose and fell like the sound of distant surf. Lily's gaze darted wildly across the crowd, searching for an exit. A miracle. And then she saw him. The ragged man from the alleys, standing at the very back beneath a carved wolf's head. His 2 dogs were at his heels, their eyes gleaming. He wasn't looking away now. He was looking directly at her. In that heartbeat she saw everything at once. His straight posture, the faint silver at his temple, those eyes like forest fire. He didn't look afraid. He looked as though he were waiting for her to decide. Something in her snapped loose. Before she could think of consequences, before the steward finished the words, she moved. With a sharp intake of breath, she stepped sideways, out of Cavan's reach. The hall gasped. Her veil fluttered as she slipped from the line of maidens, skirts brushing marble. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She had no plan, only the compass in her palm and the ragged man's steady gaze. She crossed the space between them in 3 racing steps, the crowd parting in confusion. When she reached him, she seized his rough cloak, rose on tiptoe, and pressed her lips to his. For an instant, the hall went silent, shocked stillness rippling outward like a dropped stone. She felt the heat of his breath, the solidness of his body beneath the patched cloth, and a jolt of something wild and electric, as if she had stepped off a cliff and into open sky. Then, the whispers started. A hiss, a roar, a collective intake of breath as hundreds of people realized what she had done. "She kissed a beggar!" someone cried. "She broke the ritual!" "Blasphemy!" Lily pulled back just enough to meet his eyes. Up close they weren't only green and gold. They were bright with something caged and powerful. She didn't know it yet, but she had just kissed the Alpha King. Cavan's claws of iron were almost on her wrist when Lily moved. A breath ago she had been frozen. Now she was a streak of sapphire and pale skin, breaking away from the line of veiled girls. Gasps rose from the nobles like startled birds. She didn't look back. All she saw was the ragged man at the far end of the hall, the only person not reaching for her, not trying to claim her. His 2 dogs rose as she approached, silent and watchful, as if they too had been waiting. Her slippers slid on the marble, but she kept running. "Lillian Blackthorn," the steward barked. "Stop this at once." The warlord's shout of fury followed, a sound like steel on stone. She ignored them all. Her compass thudded against her chest. Freedom, freedom, freedom. She reached him just as Cavan's shadow fell across the hall. Without thinking, she caught a fistful of his patched cloak, rose on her toes, and kissed him. The hall went silent, a silence so total she could hear her own heartbeat, feel the rough fabric beneath her fingers, the heat of his breath against her mouth. His body was solid and still as rock. For a heartbeat, she thought he would push her away. Instead, something shifted under her hands, a ripple of muscle, a hum of power. His fingers closed gently around her wrists, not to restrain but to steady her. When he lifted his head, his eyes burned brighter than before, gold and green like a hidden sun. Around them, the ritual shattered. Nobles leapt to their feet, shouting. Priests dropped their scrolls. "She's defiled the ceremony!" someone cried. "She's kissed a beggar!" The steward's staff clattered to the floor. At the far end of the hall, Cavan roared like a beast. "Seize her!" But the ragged man's voice cut through the uproar, calm and low, with a weight that silenced even the guards. "Enough." Lily's stomach lurched. She had no idea what she had just done, only that she had stopped the warlord from marking her, and that the man she had kissed was not what he seemed. The sound hit her first. Not a cheer, not a shout, but a single collective gasp, as if the entire hall had been punched in the chest. For a heartbeat, the only noise was the hiss of the braziers and the distant toll of a bell outside. Hundreds of eyes fixed on Lily and the ragged man she had just kissed. It had never happened. Not once in living memory had a maiden stepped out of the line, Not once had anyone touched a man who wasn't announced by the steward. The claiming ceremony was supposed to be inviolable, as old as the kingdom itself. And yet here she was, veil askew, lips parted, hand clutching the patched cloak of a supposed beggar. Mothers pulled their daughters back as though rebellion might be contagious. Priests clutched their scrolls to their chests. Nobles leaned forward, whispering furiously. The warriors' hands went to their blades, but they did not draw them. Not yet. Even the banners above seemed to ripple with unease. Cavan's roar cracked the silence. "Seize her! She's broken the oath!" He lunged forward, but the crowd hesitated, eyes darting between the warlord and the ragged man. The beggar hadn't moved. His dog stood rigid at his sides, hackles raised but silent. He held Lily lightly by the wrist, steadying her without force. His head was still bowed just enough to hide his face, but his presence had changed. The air around him felt charged like the moment before a storm. Lily's heart hammered. She hadn't meant to make history. She'd only wanted to escape. Now the entire hall was staring at her, as if she had toppled a throne. For the first time, she wondered who exactly she had kissed. The hall snapped back to life with a crash of metal. Cavan's roar still rang in the rafters when the first guards lunged forward, cloaks flaring, spears lowered. Boots struck the marble in unison. The echo was like thunder rolling across the mountains. The red banners trembled in the draft. Lily's stomach dropped. She had been a girl in a line of veiled maidens a heartbeat ago. Now she was a fugitive standing in a forbidden circle with a man she barely knew, staring down the blades of the crowned soldiers. Her hands started to shake. She curled them into fists to hide it. "Seize them," barked a captain. But even as he said it, his eyes flicked uneasily at the ragged man beside her. None of the guards had drawn close yet. They advanced in steps, slow and wary, as if toward a wild animal. The man's grip on Lily's wrist was light, almost casual, yet it steadied her more than iron chains could have restrained her. He didn't move, didn't raise a hand, only stood between her and the oncoming wall of spears. At his heels, the two dogs bristled, fur rising, a low sound rumbling from their throats. It wasn't a bark or snarl, but a deep, rolling warning, the kind that makes prey animals freeze. Across the hall, the crowd surged back from the dais, nobles pressing against pillars, priests clutching their scrolls. Some were shouting for punishment, some for mercy. Mothers clutched their daughters close. Every eye flicked from the warlord to the ragged man and back again. Cavan shoved a guard aside and stalked closer, face dark with fury. "Take them," he bellowed. "Chain the girl, gut the beggar." Still the line of guards hesitated. Something about the man in rags, his stillness, his eyes, the way the air around him seemed to hum like struck metal, froze them at the edge of the circle. One soldier swallowed hard and muttered, "He's not right." Lily felt it too. The hairs on her arms lifted. The room smelled suddenly of pine and cold wind, as though the wild beyond the walls had stepped inside. She realized with a shock that she was less afraid of the guards than of what this man might be. He finally spoke. His voice was low, but it traveled, a ripple cutting through the chaos. "Enough." It wasn't a shout, but the word landed like a blow. The guards froze mid-step. Even Cavan blinked, thrown off balance. For an instant, the hall held its breath, the whole kingdom's ceremony teetering on the edge of something unseen. Lily looked up at him, heart pounding. She had no idea yet who he really was, but she knew one thing. She had just kissed a man who could stop an army with a single word. The guard's circle had almost closed. Spears glittered inches from Lily's shoulders. The smell of oiled metal and sweat was suffocating. She felt her breath snag in her chest, waiting for the thrust. Then the ragged man moved. It wasn't a lunge or a fight. He simply stepped forward, drawing her with him so that she stood a little behind his shoulder. The motion was unhurried, but it parted the guards as though they had been pushed by an invisible hand. The two dogs glided at his sides, heads low, eyes like burning coals. He lifted his head, and the hood slipped back far enough for the light to catch his features. The strong line of his cheek, the streak of silver at his temple, the hard gleam in his forest-flecked eyes. He looked nothing like a beggar now. He looked like a man who could call down storms. When he spoke, the word rolled out of him like a drumbeat. Enough. The sound was not loud. It didn't need to be. It was soft, deep, and absolute. The kind of sound that carried across battlefields and through stone walls. The nearest guards stopped moving at once. The tips of their spears dipped. One soldier's hands began to shake. Another swallowed hard and took a step back without realizing it. The crowd reacted too. Priests clutched their scrolls to their chests. Nobles murmured and shifted away from the aisle. Even Cavan, towering in his black wolfskin, faltered a half step, his jaw tightening as if an old memory of obedience had been stirred. The ragged man turned his gaze slowly across the hall. "You will not touch her." His voice was still calm, but it held a weight that pressed down on every ear. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a threat. It was a fact. A hush fell so deep, Lily could hear the crackle of the braziers and her own pulse rushing in her ears. She stared up at him, stunned. The sound of his voice went through her bones, steady and certain, like a bridge appearing under her feet when she thought she was falling. This wasn't a beggar at all. This was someone the warlord feared. This was someone who spoke as though the hall, the guards, even the ritual belonged to him. Cavan's voice came out a rasp. "Who are you to command me?" But the question rang hollow and no one moved to obey him. Lily clutched her compass tighter. She had stepped out of one trap, but into what? The silence in the chamber stretched until it hurt. The guards still hadn't raised their spears again. Even the warlord's fingers twitched nervously at his belt knife. The high priest, who had been reciting the ritual only moments before, closed the book of laws with a snap. Whispers rose from the benches of robed elders at the edge of the dais. The council, old men and women whose word usually ended all disputes, were leaning toward one another, voices sharp and low. This had never happened before. No maiden had ever broken the claiming. No man had ever silenced the guards with a single word. Finally, the eldest counselor rose, leaning on his carved staff. His eyes flicked from Lily to the ragged man and back again, as though weighing not just them but the air around them. When he spoke, his voice was measured but tight. "This act is without precedent. The ceremony cannot continue under such disruption. Until the identity of this man and the will of the gods are known, the council will postpone judgment." The word postpone ran through the hall like a spark. Nobles gasped. Priests began to argue under their breath. Cavan snarled but held his ground. Even he dared not openly defy a council decree in front of the entire court. Two guards stepped forward to form a loose ring around Lily and the beggar, but not to seize them. Instead, the counselor added, "They will be escorted to the sanctuary house until the council reconvenes. No harm is to come to them." His gaze lingered on the ragged man. "And no claim is to be marked." It was a stay of execution, not freedom. But for Lily, whose heart was still hammering from the warlord's nearness, it felt like a miracle. She clutched her skirts and glanced up at the man beside her. He stood straight and calm, as though he had expected this. Inside, though, she wondered, who can stand in the middle of the claiming ceremony, speak one word, and bend the council's will? Two guards closed in on Lily and the ragged man. The high counselor's words about sanctuary still echoed in her ears, but the grip on her arm was iron hard, and the look in the guard's eyes was anything but protective. She tried to glance back at her parents, but her mother had fainted and her father had turned his face away. The nobles were already whispering about omens and curses. Somewhere up on the dais, the warlord Cavan gave a thin, wolfish smile. The guards marched them through a narrow passage beneath the ceremonial hall. The air grew colder, rough stones scraping Lily's shoulders as they turned down stair after stair. Instead of the bright marble she had expected of a sanctuary, Torches flickered on damp, moss-covered walls. Water dripped from the ceiling. "This isn't the sanctuary house," Lily whispered. "Where are you taking us?" No one answered. At the bottom of the stair, a rusted gate swung open. Inside lay a row of cells, dark holes with straw on the floor. The smell of iron and old blood made her stomach lurch. The taller guard shoved Lily inside and slammed the door. "Breaking the law has a price," he muttered. "Counsel or no counsel." Her palms hit the cold stone as she stumbled forward. She caught herself on the wall and spun back. "You can't do this." "The counsel." But the guards were already dragging the ragged man toward a cell at the far end. He went without resisting, eyes unreadable under his hood. The gate clanged shut behind him. Only then did one of the guards mutter to the other, low but not low enough. "If they want sanctuary, let the priests fetch them from the dungeons." Footsteps faded up the stairwell, leaving Lily in the dim light of a single torch. The chill of the stone seeped into her bones. She hugged herself, trying to breathe. Across the corridor, the beggar sat down calmly on the bench of his cell, shackled hands resting on his knees. For a moment his eyes met hers through the bars, and something in the way he looked at her, steady, almost amused, made her heart skip, as if this prison was only a pause in a much larger game. The clank of keys echoed off the stone. Guards led the ragged man to the opposite cell, chains dangling from his wrists. He didn't struggle. He didn't even glance at the guards. Each step he took was slow, measured, as if he were the one escorting them. They shoved him inside and slammed the gate. The lock clicked, but instead of sagging or cursing, he sat down on the rough bench with the grace of a man lowering himself onto a throne. His hands rested on his knees. His breathing was steady. The torchlight caught his eyes, and for an instant they gleamed like molten gold before dimming again. Lily hugged her arms and sank down onto the straw of her own cell. You're not afraid?" she whispered across the corridor. He tilted his head slightly, as though listening to a faraway sound. "Fear belongs to those who have something to lose," he said quietly. "I lost everything a long time ago." The words sent a shiver through her. His voice held no tremor, no bitterness, only calm certainty, like the mountains at dawn. The guards muttered under their breath and avoided his gaze as they withdrew, their boots ringing up the stairway. When the last echo faded, the dungeon went very still. Lily stared at him through the bars. The ragged clothes, the chains, the straw-strewn floor, none of it fit him. He sat like a lion behind a fence of sticks, waiting for the moment it would break. Her heartbeat slowed, curiosity pressing harder than fear now. "Who are you?" she whispered, but he only gave her a faint, unreadable smile. The torch in the corridor hissed, throwing long, jagged shadows across the stones. For a long while, Lily just sat on the straw, knees drawn to her chest, trying to swallow the knot of rage and fear in her throat. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Cavan's hand reaching for her, the guards' spears, the council's faces. Across the corridor, the beggar still sat on the bench, elbows resting on his knees, head slightly bowed as though he were listening to something only he could hear. Not a flicker of worry crossed his face. Something inside her snapped. "You!" Her voice cracked in the damp air. She pushed herself up and grabbed the bars. "Do you even understand what you've done? You've ruined everything." His head turned slowly. The torchlight caught his eyes, making them gleam faintly, but he didn't answer. "I could have been marked, yes," she went on, voice rising. "But at least my family would have been safe. At least I wouldn't be thrown in a dungeon like a criminal." Her hands tightened on the cold iron until her knuckles whitened. "Now they'll punish my parents, maybe exile them, all because I kissed a beggar who stands there as if none of it matters." The man studied her for a long heartbeat, then said very softly, "You kissed me, girl. That was your choice." Her breath caught. "Because I thought you were harmless. Because I was desperate. She swallowed hard. Because you were supposed to be nothing. Silence hung between them. Then his mouth curved in a shadow of a smile, not cruel, not kind, unreadable. Nothing is never what it seems in this kingdom, he murmured. The faintest tremor ran through the floor under her bare feet, as though the dungeon itself recognized the truth of his words. Lily shivered and gripped the bars tighter, torn between fury, fear, and a new, dangerous curiosity. The torch burned lower, dripping wax onto the stone. Lily still clutched the bars, breath sharp, eyes fixed on the man across the corridor. He had not moved except to shift his hands from his knees to the bench. In the flickering light, the ragged edges of his cloak looked almost like a mantle of fur. "You speak like you own this place," she said finally, voice hoarse. "Who are you really?" His gaze lifted to hers, and for a heartbeat she thought she saw something flicker in his pupils, a ring of molten gold inside the green. It vanished before she could be sure. He leaned forward slightly, resting his forearms on his knees. "Names are powerful here," he said. "The one I carry would bring down these walls if spoken aloud." "That's not an answer," she snapped. "It's the only one you'll get tonight." His tone softened, though, as he went on. "I was not always a beggar. Once I commanded men who would have made Cavan kneel. Once the council wrote laws at my word." Her breath caught. "A lord?" He gave a low sound that might have been a laugh. "More than that. Less than that now." He turned his hand palm up, revealing a faint mark on the skin. A silver scar shaped like a crescent. "Do you know what this is?" She shook her head. "Of course you don't. They've scrubbed the stories clean." His eyes met hers again, calm but bright. "But you've seen it before, carved into the banners over the palace gates." Lily's mind flashed to the emblem she had seen flying above the king's keep, a silver crescent on black. Her stomach dropped. "That's the royal sigil." He closed his hand, the scar disappearing into his fist. "Glimpses are all I can give you now. The rest will come when the time is right." Lily backed from the bars, heart hammering. Her world had just tilted again. She wasn't locked in a dungeon with a beggar. She was locked in a dungeon with someone who bore the king's own mark. The dungeon smelled of damp stone and iron. Lily sat on the straw with her back to the wall, arms wrapped around her knees. She had stopped shaking, but her thoughts wouldn't stop racing. Every word the man across the corridor had spoken seemed to echo in her skull. She tried to push it away, but old fragments kept rising to the surface. Her grandmother's voice at the hearth telling stories. Before the council there were the first laws. Before the claiming there was the choosing. If a maiden's lips touched a man's before the mark, she bound his fate to hers under the moon. At the time, Lily had thought it was just a fireside tale. All the girls had giggled about it. No one believed in those first laws anymore. But the memory of the hall would not fade. The gasps, the priests stopping mid-chant, the way the guards had frozen at one word from the beggar. If it had been just defiance, why had the council hesitated? Why had Cavan not simply dragged her away? Her stomach flipped. "No," she whispered, pressing her hands to her mouth. "No, it's just an old story." Across the corridor, the man lifted his head at her whisper. His eyes caught the torchlight like twin coins. "Old stories survive for a reason," he said quietly. "You kissed me before the mark. You invoked something older than the council." Lily's breath caught. "That can't be. That's not real." He tilted his head slightly. "Isn't it?" Her pulse thudded in her ears. She remembered the banner over the palace gates, the crescent mark on his palm. She remembered her grandmother's rhyme. "Moon chooses first, wolf bows after." Her hands began to shake again, this time not with fear, but with the weight of what she might have done. "I didn't know," she whispered. "I just wanted to escape." "Foolishness," he murmured, but his expression softened. "Or courage. Sometimes they are the same." Lily hugged her knees tighter. Her impulsive act had not just saved her from the warlord, it had woken a law no one dared speak of. And if the council realized it too, everything in the kingdom might change. Across the corridor, the man's faint, unreadable smile returned. "Now," he said, "they cannot claim you without claiming me. And that changes everything." While Lily and the disguised Alpha King sat in the damp undercroft, the hall above was anything but quiet. Nobles still crowded the benches, whispering furiously. Priests thumbed their prayer beads. The claiming ceremony had been stopped mid-ritual for the first time in living memory, and no one knew what to do. Cavan saw his chance. He strode back to the center of the dais, cloak of black wolfskin swirling behind him. The brazier fire picked out the scars on his forearms as he raised both hands for silence. "You all saw it," he growled. "This girl spat on our laws in front of the moon and the council. She kissed filth to mock the claiming. If she goes unpunished, every maiden will rebel, and the council's word will mean nothing." The crowd murmured. Some of the younger warriors shouted their agreement. "Punish her. Restore the right. Blood for the gods." Cavan paced like a predator, his voice rising. "She defiled the ritual, she spat on the gods, and that man—" He jabbed a finger toward the stairway down to the dungeons. "Is no beggar but a deceiver. This is treason, and treason must be answered." A few counselors shifted uneasily on their benches. One of the older women hissed, "We have not yet weighed the omens, Cavan. The girl may have invoked an ancient rite." "Ancient nonsense," he snapped, turning on her. "Do you want collar, a crown. The wolf stopped before her. It didn't bare its teeth. It simply watched her, its breath steaming in the cold night air. In the distance, she heard the echo of a horn and voices chanting in a language she almost recognized. Moon chooses first, wolf bows after. She reached out a hand. The wolf lowered its head until her fingers brushed the fur, warm, alive. At her touch, the forest dissolved into a hall of stone, banners of black and silver unfurling above. The same wolf now stood upright as a man, his eyes the same, the silver crown gleaming brighter. Lily jerked awake, heart hammering. The dungeon ceiling loomed above her. The torch almost burned out. Across the corridor, the beggar still sat, head bowed, but for an instant she thought she saw the glint of a circlet above his dark hair before the shadows swallowed it. She pressed a trembling hand to her mouth. Her grandmother's rhyme ran through her head like a whisper. Moon chooses first, wolf bows after. What if it wasn't a story at all? The torchlight had burned down to a stub when Lily's eyes fluttered open. Her dream still clung to her like mist. The wolf, the crown, the whispered rhyme. Across the corridor, the beggar was sitting in the same posture as before, head lowered, but his eyes were open, watching the stairwell. She frowned. What? A faint metallic sound cut her off, not the steady drip of water this time. A new sound, the whisper of a blade being drawn. Before she could even turn her head, a figure slipped from the shadows at the bottom of the stairs. A man in a guard's cloak, but moving too lightly, too fast. In his hand, a narrow dagger glinted dull and black, the kind dipped in poison. His eyes flicked to Lily's cell. She scrambled backward on the straw, heart hammering. Guards, someone. But the beggar was already on his feet. The attacker hissed and moved toward Lily's bars. Council says the girl must not live to invoke the old law, he whispered, and thrust his arm through the bars. A snarl, like no human sound, rolled through the dungeon. The beggar moved so fast Lily barely saw it. One moment at the back of his cell, the next gripping the attacker's wrist through the iron bars. His hood fell back. For an instant, the gold-green blaze of his eyes lit the cell like foxfire. The dagger clattered to the stones. The assassin choked, his face whitening as though something unseen pressed down on him. "Release me," he croaked. "Leave," the beggar said, voice low but carrying a weight that made Lily's bones vibrate. "Tell whoever sent you that she is under my protection." He released the man. The assassin stumbled backward as if struck, then fled up the stairs without another word, cloak whipping behind him. Silence rushed back into the dungeon. Lily stared at the man across the corridor, chest heaving. "You," she whispered. "What are you?" He knelt and picked up the fallen dagger with 2 fingers, examining the black edge before flicking it into a dark corner. Then he looked at her, expression unreadable. "Someone who will not let you die tonight," he said quietly, and sat back down on his bench. Lily pressed a trembling hand to her heart. The dream, the scar, the eyes, the crown. Everything was starting to make a terrible kind of sense. Hours crawled by after the assassination attempt. Lily sat on the cold stone, back pressed to the wall, still replaying the flash of gold-green eyes and the hiss of the dagger. Across the corridor, the beggar had gone back to his patient stillness, but she could feel his alertness like a heat in the air. Then, above them, a dull boom rolled through the stones, followed by shouts. Another. The dungeon walls trembled. Torches flickered and dust sifted down from the ceiling. Somewhere up in the palace, chaos had erupted. A guard sprinted down the stairs, eyes wide. "Rebellion!" he gasped, fumbling for his keys. "The warlord's men!" His sentence ended in a scream as another explosion shook the stairwell and he bolted back upward. Lily scrambled to her knees. "What's happening?" she whispered. The beggar stood, a shadow moving inside shadows. "An opportunity," he said simply, and reached for the iron bars of his cell. To her astonishment, the lock clicked without a key, as if something unseen had twisted it. He stepped out and moved to her cell. "Come." She hesitated. How? Later." His voice had the same weight it had held when he faced the assassin. "Now, move." Another shout echoed down the stairwell. Steel clanged against steel. The dungeon door at the top banged open, the smell of smoke curling down. He snapped the lock on her cell the same way and pulled her out by the wrist. His grip was firm but not cruel, radiating a strength that made her pulse jump. They slipped through a narrow service passage she hadn't even known was there, stone walls slick and close around them. Behind, she heard boots on the stairs, men calling her name. The beggar glanced over his shoulder once, eyes glinting, and the passage seemed to swallow their pursuers' sounds. Up a flight of hidden steps, through a cracked door, they emerged into the lower courtyard. Smoke coiled from the palace roof. War cries and the clash of weapons rose from the halls. Nobles were running in every direction. The beggar drew his hood lower and steered her into the shadows of a crumbling archway. "Why are you helping me?" she demanded over the din, breathless. He looked at her then, the hood falling back just enough for her to see the line of his jaw, the flicker of those inhuman eyes. "Because you chose first," he said quietly. "And because this kingdom is not what it seems." Another explosion shook the ground. He took her hand again. "Stay close," he ordered. "We're not safe yet." Lily glanced once at the burning palace behind them, then at the man whose strength felt more like command than desperation. Whoever he really was, she realized, he was her only chance to survive the night. They burst out of the service tunnel into the outer gardens of the palace, the night sky cracked with smoke and fire. Bells clanged somewhere near the city gates. The scent of burning pitch and iron filled Lily's nose. The beggar didn't slow. He pulled her through rows of marble statues heading toward the perimeter wall. Shouts echoed behind them. Guards or rebels, she couldn't tell. Torches bobbed closer, voices calling her name like a curse. He stopped abruptly in the shadow of an ancient oak. His head tilted, nostrils flaring. Lily's breath caught. The gold-green glow in his eyes was no longer just a trick of the torchlight. It pulsed like a heartbeat. "They're surrounding the gate," he said. "We won't make it in this form." She blinked. "This form?" He turned to her fully. Even under the hood, his face seemed sharper, more feral, the scar at his temple glinting like a rune. "Stay behind me and don't run," he said quietly, "no matter what you see." "What are you talking?" The howl cut her off. It started low in his chest and rolled upward, a sound that made the leaves tremble and her knees weaken. He dropped her hand and stepped back. The air shimmered around him like heat above a fire. His spine arched, muscles surging under the ragged cloak. Bones shifted with soft cracks. His fingers lengthened, nails curving into claws. Fur as black as midnight rippled out of his skin. Lily stumbled back, one hand to her mouth. In the space of a heartbeat, the beggar was gone. In his place stood a massive wolf, easily shoulder-high to her chest, its coat dark as ash but shot with silver under the moon. Its eyes, those same gold-green eyes, locked on hers. The torches broke through the hedge, men shouting, "There! The girl!" The wolf turned its head, lips curling back in a silent snarl. The guard skidded to a halt, faces blanching. One dropped his spear. Another whispered a prayer. Lily's heart thundered. The dream. The crown. Moon chooses. First, wolf bows after. She wasn't dreaming anymore. The wolf looked back at her once, a silent command in its gaze. Then it leapt forward, a blur of black and silver, scattering the attackers like dry leaves. Spears snapped. Men screamed. The path to the outer wall cleared in seconds. It padded back to her side, fur bristling but eyes steady. Without thinking, she reached out and laid a trembling hand on its neck. Warm, alive, powerful. The wolf bent its head slightly, as if acknowledging her touch, then nudged her toward the opening it had carved. For the first time since the ceremony, Lily felt a flicker of something like hope, mingled with terror and wonder. Whatever else he was, she wasn't alone anymore. They didn't stop running until the palace walls were nothing but a jagged line of stone behind them. The night air was colder out here, sharp with pine and damp earth instead of smoke. Somewhere in the dark an owl called, and the forest seemed to swallow the sounds of pursuit. The great wolf slowed, then stopped beside a stream that glittered in the moonlight. It shook itself, sending a shiver through its massive frame, then lowered its head to drink. Lily stumbled to a halt a few paces away, her chest heaving. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying to make sense of what she'd just seen. The transformation, the power, the way the guards had fled, the dream, the rhyme, her impulsive kiss. All the pieces pressed against her mind until they clicked into a shape she could no longer deny. "You're not a beggar," she whispered. The wolf lifted its head. Water dripped from its muzzle. Gold-green eyes met hers steadily. "You're him." Her voice trembled. "The Alpha King." The wolf didn't deny it. It stepped toward her slowly, each movement deliberate. In the moonlight, she saw the faint silver of a circlet shimmering where its brow met fur, a crown only she seemed able to see. Memories rushed through her, the feel of his lips under hers in the hall, the council's shock, the old stories about a maiden's first choice. She realized with a lurch that she hadn't just defied the claiming ceremony. She had triggered an older law. She had chosen the Alpha King himself. A tingling warmth spread through her palm. She looked down and saw a faint mark, like a wolf's head, glowing under her skin where she'd touched him in the dungeon. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her head. "Moon chooses first. Wolf bows after." She backed up a step, heart hammering. "I bonded with you," she breathed. "I didn't even know." The wolf padded closer until it stood directly before her. It lowered its massive head until its forehead nearly touched her own. The warmth in her palm pulsed in time with her heartbeat, and for a heartbeat she swore she felt his thoughts brushing against hers. "You chose." "I accepted." A shudder ran through her, not of fear, but of something deeper. Destiny, power, an unbreakable tie she had never meant to forge. When she opened her eyes, the wolf had sat back on its haunches, watching her silently, waiting for her to understand. Lily pressed a trembling hand to the glowing mark. "What have I done?" she whispered. But under the fear, a spark of something else stirred, something she couldn't yet name. By dawn, the forest had thickened into a wild expanse Lily had never seen on any map. Ancient pines rose like pillars, their tops lost in mist. She stumbled behind the wolf, clutching her cloak, every muscle aching. The glowing mark on her palm pulsed faintly, as if keeping time with his stride. Finally, after hours of weaving through narrow deer trails and across icy streams, the wolf slowed at the foot of a granite bluff. Moss covered the stones and a waterfall thundered down its side into a pool so clear she could see the pebbles at the bottom. Lily blinked around, thinking they had reached a dead end. The wolf padded to the base of the cliff and brushed its muzzle against a crooked boulder, with a deep groan of hidden gears. The rock face shifted, revealing a dark archway wide enough for a horse. Cool air flowed out, carrying the scent of iron and pine. Lily stared. "You built this?" The wolf's shape blurred, rippling like water. A heartbeat later, the man stood before her again, no longer ragged but straight-backed, a cloak of dark fur across his shoulders, the silver circlet gleaming openly now on his brow. His eyes still held that gold-green fire. "This was built long before my reign," he said. "A sanctuary, a place for wolves who refused the council's chains." His voice was calm, but under it Lily heard steel. "It's where no warlord or priest can claim you." He extended a hand, not commanding now, but offering. "Come inside." She hesitated at the threshold, glancing back at the forest. Beyond it lay the palace, her family, the life she'd known. Gone. Ahead, the darkness of a hidden kingdom, and the man she'd accidentally bound herself to. Her palm tingled. She took a breath and stepped past him into the passage. Torches flared to life on the walls, casting light on carvings of wolves and moons. The tunnel opened into a cavernous hall carved from the heart of the mountain. Water trickled from stone fountains. Wolves of every color moved like shadows along the edges, some bowing their heads as she passed. Lily's heart thudded. This wasn't a beggar's hideout. It was a fortress, a kingdom under the kingdom. The Alpha King walked beside her, his voice softer now. Here you're safe, for a time, and here you'll learn what your choice truly means. Lily swallowed, clutching her cloak tighter. The bond between them felt heavier and brighter all at once, like a chain made of light. She had no idea if she'd made a mistake or saved herself, but she knew her life would never be the same again. Days passed, but Lily lost track of time inside the mountain. There was always the sound of running water, the flicker of torches on stone, the low murmur of voices in hallways she didn't yet dare to explore. Wolves came and went silently, their eyes flicking to her with curiosity, sometimes with respect. No one tried to harm her. No one touched her without permission. She was safer than she had been in the palace. And yet she felt caged. Her small chamber overlooked an underground pool. Food appeared without her asking. Soft furs lined the bed. She should have felt grateful. Instead, a restless heat filled her veins, a mix of panic and something she couldn't name. Every time she thought of his eyes on her, the mark on her palm burned a little brighter. He came to see her at odd hours, sometimes as a man in a simple tunic, sometimes as the wolf, padding soundlessly into the room. He didn't touch her. He didn't give orders. He simply spoke, answering her questions with patience, telling her fragments of truths about the council, about the warlord, about the kingdom's real history. When he left, the chamber felt emptier. Lily found herself pacing, fists clenched. I didn't ask for this, she muttered at her reflection in the water. I didn't ask to be his bond, his whatever this is. Her voice echoed back at her, hollow. I wanted freedom. Yet at night she dreamed of the feel of fur under her fingers, the weight of his gaze across the hall. The memory of his power as he'd torn through the guards came back again and again, frightening and thrilling her in equal measure. She pressed the glowing mark on her palm to her lips as if she could rub it away. It only pulsed more warmly, like a heartbeat. I hate this, she whispered. But under the anger, a spark of curiosity burned, and under that, a pull she didn't dare name. When she saw him across the great hall the next day, speaking to his lieutenants, silver circlet catching the firelight, her stomach tightened with the same mix of fury and attraction. She wasn't free, but she wasn't a prisoner either. She was something else entirely, something she didn't understand yet. She turned away quickly, muttering to herself, safe doesn't mean free, and safe doesn't mean I have to want him. But the echo of his scent and the warmth of the bond told a different story. For days, Lily had bitten back her questions, but the tension inside her chamber had grown too tight. The glow of the mark on her palm wouldn't fade, and every time he entered, she felt the pull between them deepen. Tonight, as he dismissed his lieutenants and the great hall emptied, she stepped out from the shadows. No more half answers, she said, voice steady despite her trembling hands. Why were you in my village dressed as a beggar? Why were you at the ceremony at all? He looked up from the map spread across the stone table. In this light, he didn't look like a beggar or even a king. He looked like someone carrying a heavy burden. Slowly, he straightened, the silver circlet glinting faintly on his brow. I told you, he said softly. Our laws are older than the council's. A king may not take a mate by force, he must be chosen first. His gaze slid to the glowing mark on her hand. For centuries the council has twisted that right, turning the claiming into a spectacle. I wanted to see... His jaw tightened. I needed to see if there was still a woman in this kingdom who would choose freely, not for power, not for fear. Lily's breath caught. You disguised yourself? Just to test women? He shook his head. To test everyone. My advisors, my warriors, the nobles who bow in daylight and plot at night. I walked as a beggar to see who still had loyalty, who still had kindness, who would feed a stranger's child. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. That's how I saw you. Her anger flared. So I was your experiment? His expression darkened. No, you were my answer. He stepped closer, but not enough to crowd her. When you kissed me in the hall, you invoked an older bond than any crown. I didn't plan it, but I won't pretend it hasn't changed everything. Lily turned away, hugging her arms to herself. His words echoed in her head. Not for power, not for fear. The mark on her palm pulsed as if in agreement. She had wanted freedom, and somehow she had stumbled into the center of the kingdom's oldest law. She faced him again, eyes bright. So now what? Am I your prisoner or your queen? The Alpha King's eyes glowed faintly in the torchlight. That, he said quietly, is what you must decide. The torches in the hall hissed softly. After his confession, the silence stretched between them, thick as smoke. Lily's hands curled into fists at her sides, the glow of the mark on her palm flickering like an ember she wished she could snuff out. He took a step closer. You have invoked an ancient right, he said quietly. In our oldest law, the one who chooses first becomes not only mate but queen. The council cannot touch you now. You are under my protection. All that remains is for you to accept the bond. Lily lifted her chin. Accept, she echoed. You make it sound like a coronation. His expression softened. It can be. You would be free of the warlord. No one could claim you again. You'd stand at my side as my equal. The word equal rang in her ears like an insult. She shook her head, taking a step back. I didn't kiss you for a crown, she said. I kissed you to escape a man who was about to mark me like cattle. I wanted freedom, not a throne. He blinked, as if no one had ever spoken to him that way. Freedom and a throne are not opposites. They are for me, she snapped. I grew up watching the palace devour people, watching the council steal choice from every girl my age. You think putting a crown on my head will make me free? She pressed her glowing palm against her chest. I don't even know who I am anymore under this bond. For a heartbeat, his eyes flared gold green, the wolf in him responding to her defiance. But then he exhaled slowly, lowering his gaze. I would never force you, he murmured. Even now. Good, she said, voice trembling, but firm. Because I won't be your queen. Silence fell again, but it was different this time. The tension between them was a living thing. Anger and desire and confusion knotted together. He nodded once, slowly. Then you remain under my protection until you decide your path, he said at last. But understand, Lily, by invoking the right, you've already changed more than you know. The council, the warlord, they will not stop. Freedom may not be as simple as walking away. Lily turned from him, staring at the carved wolves on the wall. She wanted to scream, to run, to be anywhere but in the center of a destiny she hadn't chosen. But another part of her, quieter and deeper, whispered that for the first time someone was offering her a choice, even if it was a terrible one. She clenched her fists. Then I'll find my own way, she said under her breath, with or without your crown. Far above the mountain stronghold, the palace was no longer simply chaotic. It was a storm. The warlord who had tried to claim Lily, Cavan, had not faded quietly into disgrace. Instead, he'd turned the humiliation into fuel. In the great council chamber, under the cracked crest of the moon, he stood before the gathered nobles and spoke like a prophet of war. This so-called Alpha King hides in his mountain, consorting with outcasts and wolves, while our daughters are stolen by ancient rites. He claims a beggar's girl defied our sacred ceremony and now he shields her. Is this strength? Or is this weakness? The nobles shifted in their seats. Some had already lost sons or fortunes to the king's reforms. Others simply feared the old laws he invoked. Cavan raised his hand. He says she chose him freely. I say she bewitched him. I say the council's power is at stake. If we do not act now, an outcast girl will wear a crown over all of us. He unfurled a banner, white, painted with a black wolf's head dripping blood. Let her be the proof of his corruption. Let her be the spark of our uprising. Whispers turned to shouts. Gold was pledged, soldiers promised, priests declared the old rite a heresy. Cavan's voice rose above them. We will drag her from his den and restore the old order. We will choose our own king. Within hours, messengers rode out to every corner of the kingdom. Caravans of weapons rolled toward the borders. Cavan began calling Lily the Witch of the Wolves, a symbol of rebellion. Pamphlets with her likeness, half girl, half beast, circulated in the towns. Back in the mountain, Lily began to notice how the wolves' eyes grew more watchful, how hushed conversation stopped when she entered. She hadn't agreed to be queen, but she was already at the center of a war. When the Alpha King entered her chamber one night, his cloak heavy with rain, his jaw was set. Cavan has raised an army, he said quietly, and he's raised you as his banner. Lily's heart clenched. I never asked for this, she whispered. I know. His eyes glinted in the dim light. But now you must decide whether to hide, to fight, or to run, because they're coming for both of us. The mountain air bit at Lily's cheeks as she followed the Alpha King out of the fortress at dawn. Below them the valley was a swirl of mist and shadow. Above them the pines rose like spears. A dozen wolves padded silently around her, their eyes glowing faintly in the half-light. She had wanted freedom, not a crown, yet here she was, barefoot on frozen ground, about to learn from creatures she'd only ever feared in stories. This isn't about becoming one of us, the king said quietly. It's about surviving what's coming, and surviving yourself. He left her with a female wolf named Vera, larger than a horse and scar-striped across the muzzle. Vera's amber eyes studied Lily with something like amusement. Then the training began. First she learned to move, not run but move, low, silent, balanced. Hours of climbing rock faces, rolling out of falls, dodging lunges. Her hands blistered on the ropes, her knees bled on the stone, but the wolves kept circling, nudging her when she faltered, snapping when she froze. At night she collapsed on the furs, trembling, but a strange fire burned in her chest. She had never felt so alive. Next came the senses. Vera led her into the forest blindfolded and made her follow by sound and scent alone. Lily began to pick up things she'd never noticed, the crackle of a mouse in leaves, the shift of wind when a hawk turned its wings, the smell of metal from a blade long before it was drawn. Finally came the will. The Alpha King stood before her one evening as the moon rose. Wolves don't just fight with teeth, he told her. They fight with presence. Claim your space and even a predator will hesitate. She closed her eyes, breathing the mountain air, and felt something stir, the same pulse she'd felt in her dreams. She stepped forward, and the wolves bowed their heads, just slightly. Power flickered through her like lightning. For the first time since the ceremony, she didn't feel like a pawn or a prisoner. She felt like a force. At first she'd only seen the beggar, and then the king, a man of command and wolves. But as the days passed in the high mountain stronghold, layers of him began to emerge. He rose before dawn, not to give orders, but to tend the wounded wolves that limped back from patrols. She watched him wrap a splinted leg with cloth, his big hands surprisingly gentle. He sat with the pups while their mothers hunted, letting tiny paws bat at his fingers. He always ate last, and when food ran short, she noticed he gave his portion to an older scout without a word. In the evenings, when the others were gone, she caught him staring into the fire, the silver crown lying forgotten on the table. Scars she hadn't noticed before marked his shoulders and ribs. Not the shallow marks of duels, but deep, jagged reminders of battles fought alone. Once, thinking he was asleep, she heard him whisper a name she didn't know, and his voice cracked. She began to ask questions. He didn't always answer, but when he did, his words weren't proud. He spoke of the kingdom's hunger, of laws that had turned to chains, of how he'd disguised himself to see who would defy the rituals. "I wasn't looking for a queen," he admitted one night. "I was looking for proof we could be more than our traditions." And slowly, Lily's anger became something else. She still wanted freedom, but she also saw the man beneath the crown, a leader carrying wounds that weren't all on his skin. Protective, yes. Just yes. Wounded, deeply. A man who could command wolves but still kneel to help a child tie his shoe. It scared her more than his power had. The first warning came not from the scouts, but from the forest itself. Birds rose in a black cloud. The air turned heavy, metallic. Down in the valley, torchlight flickered like an orange river snaking up the mountain. The warlord's army had come. Inside the stronghold, wolves poured into the halls, their hackles raised. The Alpha King stood at the gate in full armor for the first time, silver plates etched with runes, the crown glinting on his brow. He didn't roar orders. He spoke them quietly, and the wolves moved like shadows. Lily's stomach twisted. She thought she would have more time to decide who she was. But now, outside the stone walls, banners bearing her painted face were being raised, calling her witch and traitor. She heard soldiers chanting her name with venom. This wasn't just an attack on the king, it was an attack on her. A guard pressed a cloak into her hands. "We can get you out through the mountain tunnels," he whispered. "No one would blame you if you ran." She looked at the narrow passageway leading into darkness. Freedom, anonymity, the chance to slip back into a world that no longer wanted her. Then she looked at the courtyard where the wolves gathered, at the king who had risked his throne to protect her, at the training ground, where she had bled and grown stronger. For a moment the dream of the great black wolf returned, crown shining, eyes steady. Moon chooses first. Wolf bows after. She tightened the cloak and shook her head. "No," she said. "I won't run." Her voice sounded strange in her own ears. Steady, certain. She crossed the courtyard and stood beside the Alpha King. His eyes flickered with something between relief and pride. "Then stand with me," he murmured. As the warlord's drums began to beat against the mountainside, Lily drew a blade she'd learned to wield only days before. Her hands trembled, but her feet did not move. For the first time since the claiming ceremony, the choice was truly hers. The warlord's army surged up the switchbacks like a dark tide. Arrows hissed through the sky. Stones cracked loose from the walls. Drums pounded against Lily's ribs until she thought her heart might beat in time with them. She gripped the short sword the Alpha King had given her. Only days ago she could barely lift it. Now her hands were steady. Around her, wolves flowed like water, a living barricade of fur and teeth. The gates shuddered under the first ram. "Hold!" the king called, his voice deep and calm. He was no longer the quiet beggar. He was a force of nature, silver eyes burning. Lily felt the same steadiness radiate through her, as if some of his power had seeped into her bones. The gates splintered. Soldiers poured in. Lily ducked beneath a blade, rolled like she'd been taught, came up slashing. Her strike cut the attacker's arm, and he dropped his spear with a cry. Shock jolted through her. She'd done it. She wasn't helpless anymore. The king shifted mid-charge, his body blurring, cracking into fur and muscle. The great black wolf of her dreams leapt into the enemy ranks, scattering them like dry leaves. The wolves howled and followed. Lily found herself at his flank, parrying, striking, calling warnings. She darted where his claws could not reach, her blade an extension of his teeth. Once, a spear aimed at his heart, she lunged and deflected it, taking a cut to her shoulder but saving him. His eyes met hers for a heartbeat. gratitude, fierce and raw, before he turned back to the fight. Hours bled together in a storm of steel and howls. Little by little, the warlord's forces faltered. Wolves drove them into bottlenecks. Lily and a band of fighters cut off their retreat. Finally, the warlord himself crashed through the melee, roaring her name like a curse. She stood her ground, every nerve on fire, until the Alpha King came down on him in a blur of fur and claws. When the dust settled, the warlord lay bound, his banners torn. Silence fell over the battlefield. Smoke drifted from broken torches. Lily's chest heaved, her arm ached. The king, still in wolf form, limped to her side and lowered his massive head. Without thinking, she pressed her bloody palm to his fur. Cheers rose from the wolves and the loyal guards. Word spread through the valley. The coup had failed. The girl from the claiming ceremony had stood beside the king and helped save the realm. Lily realized, trembling and exhausted, that she wasn't just a symbol anymore. She'd proved herself. Not as a queen, but as a fighter, a partner, and something the kingdom had never seen before. The fires from the battle still smoldered in the valley when the kingdom began to change. With the warlord's army broken and the nobles divided, the Alpha King called a council. But this time, not in the dark halls of the palace. He summoned them to the open square at dawn, where the claiming ceremony had always taken place. Lily stood beside him, no longer in chains, no longer hidden behind cloaks. Her shoulder was bandaged, her sword at her side. People pressed closer, murmuring. Some bowed to the king. Some stared at her, unsure. Others smiled in quiet recognition. Word of her fight had traveled faster than the messengers. The king's voice rang out over the crowd. This square has long been a place of chains and claims. Today it ends. No one will be taken against their will again. He turned to Lily. You defied a tradition older than either of us. You risked death for freedom. Will you stand with me now? Not as property, not as proof, but as partner? Lily looked out over the faces. Girls who had once feared this day, mothers clutching their children, warriors with their heads lowered. She remembered her own vow the night before the ceremony, remembered the kiss given in desperation, the dungeon, the training, the battle. All of it had brought her here. I will, she said, her voice steady. But on my terms. No chains, no ownership, only partnership. A ripple went through the crowd. Then someone began to clap, and then others, until the square filled with the sound. The Alpha King nodded, and for the first time she saw him smile. Not the smile of a ruler, but of a man who had been waiting to exhale. He took her hand and raised it. Then let this be the new tradition, he said. Two who choose, two who stand equal. And there, in the same place where her fate had once been decided for her, Lily stepped forward and kissed him, not to escape, not in panic, but in promise. The wolves howled, the banners shifted in the breeze, and the people knelt not to a king and his possession, but to a king and his chosen partner. The claiming ceremony was over. A choosing had begun,